This is the beautiful view from the cliffs of Moher in Ireland. Sheer cliffs leading to the ocean. But you can see how shallow the sea is over there, and in fact, even as far as you can see in the distance, it's fairly shallow. And in fact, many thousand years ago, that all was land for miles and miles and miles that way, and that's facing more west. But on the whole other side of the island, there's a whole area of land known as Doggerland that we realize now was also above the waters during the last ice age, whenever the sea levels were much lower. Today we're going to discuss Ireland and its connections to Atlantis, and this is going to be kind of a long one, and so it's multi-parted, and the next part is always going to be in your top left-hand corner, and I'll release them simultaneously for your viewing pleasure and not make you wait until next week for the second half, although that's a great tactic. I don't use them. But we're going to take a longboat ride. But don't worry, I'll tell you tales to pass the time along the way, give you a nice warm cup of coffee, and you can light your torch off of mine. So let's begin here. Atlantis is Ireland. This is released by Keystone University in Ireland itself, and they've taken about a new time of challenging and championing the idea that Ireland and the area over here was the ancient place that was told of as Atlantis. Could the answer to one of the world's greatest mysteries have been under our noses this whole time? The legendary lost island of Atlantis. Everyone's heard of it and everyone's got an opinion. Was it just an elaborate fiction given to us by the Greek philosopher Plato in 360, or was it a mother culture or a real place with an advanced Stone Age civilization? Well, the answer seems to be a weird conflagration of both, and perhaps a little bit more, and I'll get into that and try to remember what I'm thinking of right now to tell you later in this. Plato's legend is clearly exaggerated. It contains many historical errors and combines two places into one tale, it seems. Yet at its core, there's a grain of truth. After all, the legend of Atlantis had already been passed down by word of mouth for thousands of years before Plato himself first heard it. So it's hardly surprising that some of the details got distorted over time. And you can realize that an idea of like the telephone game and how over time it would have been conflagrated. We understand that the Phoenicians had a hand in making up some elaborate tales that people embellished a long time, and they themselves did so, and it gives for an exaggeration. And because we're talking about the ocean, we'll use the example of a fishtail, and how I caught a fish this big, and the other guys on the boat behind you are showing her a much smaller version of what you're saying. But to you in that moment, it was a great big thing. And so sometimes to exaggerate kind of shows you the excitement of the moment, if you're talking about fishing. But in mythology, it shows you the greatness and reverence that you should give to a moment. So over time, truth became history, history became legend, and legend became myth. But almost 12,000 years later, the grain of truth still survives. And yes, that mimics the showing and revealing to Frodo in The Lord of the Rings. And she tells you some things that have been forgotten, should not have been forgotten. And over time, truth becomes history, history becomes legend, and legend becomes myth. And then people don't realize that it's got a kernel of truth left in it. I've spent a lot of my life picking out little things about it, and it seems so farcical to somebody that if I found something that I made a connection, or oh, here's the exaggeration and here's this and here's that, it excites the hell out of me. I don't know if it does you, but whenever I can put it all together in the web and click that piece of puzzle in, there's an excitement involved. And then when I step back and look at it, sometimes it makes other connections. All of a sudden, oh wow. And it keeps going and going from there. People have looked at information that leads along these lines in many ways and tried to find Atlantis for hundreds of years now. But the description and things that may be thrown off just a little bit have deviated to where, well, if they say word for word straight up, there is no place that could be Atlantis. Some people believe the mid-Atlantic ridge of the Azores and the islands was pushed up much higher at this time, along with the sea level being lower, and so it would have exposed a great amount of land out there that's not just a few little island things, but it's a cluster. At the same time, though, Doggerland and everything would have been exposed up in here, but that land rebounded and sunk down whenever the ice shelf over North America went away rapidly. And we're going to talk about that, but not too deep, as I have in other videos about the Younger Dryas event repeatedly, and how it shows a correlation to this all happening in the tale of an ancient flood that's not the Sumerian flood, that's the one in the Bible that actually was the second one that they weren't going to forgive again, for God said he wasn't going to happen again, and it did. So it's kind of a little different, but it's kind of the same. And that mid-Atlantic ridge sinks down. And there's a guy that came out with a few things, and in watching his video, I felt like I can't find it anymore, but it was just a smaller one where he was talking about Atlantis, and he was saying, you know, if they just changed a few words here and a few words there, that it would be a totally different story. And if they would have said, Plato's would not have left out, if it ever was in there, perhaps, whenever he says it all went away in a day and a night, you know, swallowed up by the ocean, giving an idea of a tsunami type idea, or perhaps that it sunk down in the ocean, just swallowed it up, yum, right? But if it was to have said had happened rapidly to them, as if in a day and a night, it would change the story a whole lot, and that all of a sudden would open up these other ideals. Or we can play a game where we think what might have been said before the telephone game, but that leads down a whole myriad of things that none of them could probably be proven or faceted, and each one seemingly leaves dead ends everywhere, even less than the story itself almost at times, so we can't really go with that. Still, the story goes on, and I know I'm going on and on right here, but when I was a kid and ran through this idea, we all, you know, all the scholars had all put it down, and they're saying, forget about it, forget about it. And as I got a little older and looked into it, it basically, anybody who said anything about it was instantly tarred and feathered and act like an idiot. Put a dunce cap on him and sit in front of everybody, and everybody giggle and throw tomatoes at him. Strange. Well, academia was trying to be very refined, and they had already been through this subject a few times, so they don't want to touch upon it anymore. Well, certain people have decided, I'm going to poke the bear. Well, he's sleeping, he's in hibernation. Yeah, if I poke him, maybe I can wake him up. Knock, knock. Who's there? Reality. You ever heard the old joke, Cheech and Chong, whenever Dave's not here? It's funny. You got to. It's a stoner thing basically. But he knocks on the door and he says, "Oh, who is it?" And he won't answer. And then he knocks again. "Who is it?" And he says, "It's Dave, man." And he goes, "Who?" And he goes, "Dave." And he goes, "Oh, Dave's not here." And you hear him walk off again. And he's like, "No." And he keeps going after it again. It's kind of funny and ironic, yet frustrating a little, huh? Atlantis is three key factors. When you strip back the Atlantis legend to its very core, there are three key factors. The legend originated in Egypt, told to Solon by the priest that was there in Sais. Atlantis was an island in the Atlantic Ocean, somewhere past the Pillars of Hercules. And then there's that part of it where it says it's bigger than Asia and uh, Libya combined. Well, back then they didn't call Africa Africa, and if you look at Herodotus' map, they don't even know South or Sub-Saharan Africa exists pretty much below the Sub-Sahara. They just show it as this long loaf-looking thing without even the point on the bottom. But if we were to take that and what they knew of Asia and that combined, which is the one they're leaving out, where they're leaving out Europe, Europa itself. And so a lot of people said, I know it sounds stupid to go out the Pillars of Hercules and take a right and then look back at the land right there and go, look how big it is. But entirely there's a possibility, but it tells you there's an island, and from that island you go past to the other islands, and from that to the bigger continent, whatever lies beyond. Well, that's like going from Ireland to Greenland and around just like the Vikings did. Yeah. In the tale also, I'm putting an extra dot in here. In the tale also, it describes that this power came out from the Atlantic Ocean, and they were going on kick ass, and it was over there. To a people that are over here, they came from over there, western. But also in the ancient tales of Thoth and where he came from and stuff, it says he came from the west. A lot of people have correlated that to being Tautus the Phoenician, or the Phoenicians were hooked up through that. It's the same person and identity. Well, if you put that together and who the ancient Phoenicians were and related to, you can see this wave of time of these people coming that had advanced boats and stuff in seafaring things where they try to take us all on. They were a power coming out of there, and they were set to destroy us all with a blow, he says in his tale. But then the Greeks stood fast, and that they had helped to push them back and do the things and and they freed all of us. And when he says all of us, he was saying had actually freed the Egyptians, and that their mythology is lost a few things. For all they know is the last little flood that had come through recently, but there had been many repeated catastrophes over time that repeat themselves like an echo. And they only, like a child, only remember the very last one. But he said there had been ones before. And how do they know this? Well, in their tales, that's where they came from. And so they kind of had this. But again, it's their own telephone game. Before it ever got to Solon, before it telephone gamed a little bit and got down to the time of Plato. But that eventually was set in stone, and then so that can't be telephone gamed anymore. But we can look at that and kind of say, man, if there was just a couple of words changed or added, that it correlates to quite a few places. But the Atlanteans were a advanced Stone Age seafaring people, or a mother culture. Well, if we look at that area and where people are coming from, it does seem to happen over and over again. For there was this instance that they talk about so long ago. But then there's the sea people, that do the same thing, and in Echo and kind of the Vikings, very similar ships, knock knock. Name a place on Earth from Antarctica to Africa, Sweden to South America, and someone will have claimed, though, that it is Atlantis. What's strange about that separated lone statement here is it's possible we're saying yes. Yes to what? Yes to North Africa for sure, because that's the Atlas Mountains and things. So they had that going on, and of course that they came there. They had that. Who are those people that are there? Well, the ancient Amazai has to do with Amazons. Oh, the Amazon. Nah, pay attention. Amazai, Amazon, Amazi. There they are. Has to do with those same people, and there are still blue-eyed and green-eyed, red-haired, blonde-haired people right there. I've done a few videos on it, and they've proven they are the endemic people to North Africa. Ramsey seems to be somewhat related to them, but that's another video. Mother culture, they say, huh? Knock knock. Let's continue. Everybody's buying firearms. Funny how they show black and white people there together in one shot. This is a video called Atlantis, Ireland. And you need to watch it as a separate thing if you're going to watch it. It's about 3 hours or a little more, though, and the guy kind of goes into all of this stuff that he's going into and talks about it. Shows some pictures and things, and I thought I would do a little clip thing onto it, but if I did, this video would be so long. Already this is going to be about a 4-parter, but if I was to do one on this in 3.5 hours, it would probably stretch it into 5. If I cut that into 45-minute segments, it'd be a 6 to 8 segment spot. Ooh, but I got some stuff I keep adding in that he does not have. Does not say in that way. The spider does not make the connection. Scientists roll our eyes whenever a new Atlantis theory emerges because the 3 key factors, the Egyptian connection, the Atlantic location, and the advanced Stone Age civilization, are the first casualties of the next fanciful claim. It seems that every time someone finds as much as a brick underwater somewhere, they claim to have found Atlantis. And this is the boy that cried wolf scenario, and I've got a video about that, and it really isn't about this, but it's about other things. But I might release it here about the same time, and because that's happening now, but that happened a long time ago and many times. And in fact, a boy that cries wolf one too many times about Atlantis makes everybody walk away from it. Scientists, though, rightly demand proof. Surely if such a mother culture existed, a civilization which predated the Greeks and the Egyptians, then there must be some physical evidence. Through my videos, I've shown you there's a lot of evidence of people that are doing great things before the Greeks. They did some incredible stuff. They are the pinnacle of pulling things up a notch, definitely. We can all see that plainly. You say that in the Romans, and they took it up a notch. Look at the amount of notches then that the Greeks were able to take things to a next level, which not just 1,000 years before that and so on was coming out of Egypt and Sumerian stuff, and how they took it to another level. But that's just one of many of the same people. Academics claim that Atlantis was a fable. Yet this doesn't stand up to scrutiny. Ancient Egyptian texts describe how their own ancestors came from a sacred island in the Atlantic Ocean that was devastated in a great flood. Indeed, they originally tell you that they came to the land in a great flood, and then it was flooded, the Nile, at the time that they came. Back then, there would have been a hell of a flood going on. Devastating floods, right? Well, one little weird thing, see if I can add it in here. They tell you that the flood that happens to them in a day and a night, it's a disaster, right? Disaster. Well, if you look into linguistics and the way they even wrote, and it says it right there in the word itself, they're not necessarily, what's the word disaster? Well, it pinnacles out of Latin, but then you have to go back, and of course we're talking about the Greeks here, and so whenever they get transposed and everybody's accept something over time, but disaster, much like dispater, which is the devil, which I've done a video about and everything, and then what people go to do that, but what that's dis, which is a negative situation, and pater, which is father, as in paternal, and we still use this to this day, but also Peter and St. Peter and things all go with this. But they tell you it's a disaster. And what is that? Well, that's a bad star that happened. Disaster. That means bad star. Aster. Astrea. That's star. That's where we get the word star from. But that's Proto-Indo-European linguistics too, versus somebody saying Astrea and other people saying Astara and the other people saying star. What's a bad star? Well, it's a name, a comet, meteor type thing, falling star. So that's bad, isn't it? So sometimes you could just change one word, or I didn't change a damn thing. All I did was go, here's some synonyms and what that word means. And it could lead to, well, there was this disaster today and night. Oh, wait, hold on. You're just mulling over something right there. There was this comet impact meteor thing that happened and it swallowed up in a day and a night because of it. It's kind of, maybe that phone game got that a little bit swishy there. So, others claim that Atlantis sunk to the bottom of the ocean, eliminating all evidence. However, geologists have mapped the entire Atlantic seabed and are adamant that there is simply no room for a lost sunken island. They insist that it's not scientifically possible and that any claims of a large sunken island lack credibility. Well, that mid-Atlantic ridge doesn't show up to be something as big and have a fertile plain or anything like that, even if we did raise it up. But strangely enough, Ireland has that exact same thing, and they said western face, which would have been what people come into boats facing, and how it has the cliffs, and that's what we were looking at the very first point. So they insist that it's not scientifically possible and that any claims of a large sunken island lack credibility. Well, what if it's not a sunken island, like the island sinks, but in actuality the ocean raised 400 meters and the area we're talking about got swallowed up, as if in a day and a night. Therefore, if Atlantis mother culture ever did exist, it must still be evidence above ground, not just wild speculation. But this would, of course, been the higher ground, and these seafaring type people would have had a lot of ports and all these type of things, and so yeah, that would have been underwater. And Doggerland is underwater, and there's been incredible finds there, but it's hard to do underwater astronomy or archaeology. I'm sorry. Well, we found a giant boat dock, 6,000 years old or more, that's huge, like Fisherman's Wharf. That was a boat building place of these people that weren't building reed boats or anything. It's a good boat building thing, and that heritage of Irish incredible boat building and the people that we're talking about, the same people, even though Proto-Europeans wouldn't have had much of a use for a gigantic boat, together end up forming people that make great boats, and that heritage comes all the way through from the great ship that we know of, the Titanic, who was birthed and created and came out of there, White Star Lines and the whole 9 yards, and the heritage of Irish shipbuilding. I could go on, but then I'd be going on and on. Have a sip of coffee. So how do we solve this riddle? Well, by bypassing Plato's tale altogether and going right to the source, ancient Egypt. The surprising location of Atlantis. Well, ancient Egyptian texts describe how Egypt's ancestors came from a sacred island in the Atlantic Ocean that was devastated in a great flood. Does that sound familiar? Well, yeah, the Great Flood story does. Well, that's where the team from Keystone University thought also. And in the largest investigation ever conducted into the legend of Atlantis, Keystone research team used cutting-edge techniques from multiple disciplines and reviewed thousands of ancient texts, including rare manuscripts from Egypt, Greece, and Ireland. As a result, they have compiled over 1,000 pieces of evidence supporting a surprising yet oh so obvious location for the lost island of Atlantis, and they say Ireland. Now this picture we're fixing to show you here is an esoteric drawing, and notice in the background between the curtains they have another veil that's there. The veil has little dots and sparkles on it, but there's also a bear and a little bear that's up above it there, and a cupid and so on, and that's a signification of the cosmos. And when we look here at the picture, which I cover up with that stupid symbol, what we can see here is different people such as Kronos, but Plato, Aristotle, and others. In fact, Plato, it signifies him on his hat, and if you look, he's wearing a Phrygian cap. Now, this is an esoteric, one of those things that has symbology in the art. It's a 17th century artwork of Olaf Rudbeck dissecting the world and revealing the secret location of Atlantis. He is surrounded by well-known figures of antiquity such as Plato, Aristotle, and Homer. Yet, when we look at this, you can see that he's using a compass and they're going around, and so is Kronos involved. And when they're looking here, they're looking at a globe. For well, at this time, we have the globe figured out, right? You see that? Can you also see that they see Europa and Europe, and this would have been Africa, and the pillars of Hercules are between these two people, this gap right there, and so the Mediterranean is behind him right here. Here's Asia that's listed, but then again, where they're pointing out the fact, strangely, and he looks at you when he makes this revelation that this is the place they're talking about, right? Now, Ireland's over here, and they really are looking at some place that looks very much similar to Doggerland, but you realize all this was pretty much connected, and it still makes sense, and where one of the hub of the people were definitely at. But another interesting thing that you can see in this shot is, of course, Plato, and how Plato is looking here, and you see the excitement in his eyes and like aha a bit, and also Homer and aha a bit. And if you look, they're looking on the other side of the globe. For if we're checking this out right here, right behind his arm would have been an Iceland area, and then over here where he's pointing at would have been leading to America, and on their side of the globe right now they would be facing would be America, right? And so they talk about these islands that started it off and these people that had come out of there and had these islands, but that led to this place far over. Well, by the time the tale had already gotten around, there was already contact who had gone across. And we look at places like the Solutreans and things like that, and there definitely was contact. And we talk about redheads and everything else too, again, repeatedly in this, and in the next parts coming up. And the Irish have that high component, and those Amazigh and Amazon, the Amazigh, have that high component that's in there. Ramses is a redhead, and so on. But are there not so many tales of redheads and redheaded giants in South America, as well as many of the tales in North America. We're all very familiar with them, in Lovelock Cave and all of those type of things. But I always thought it was very esoteric and interesting that they show all of this. And in fact, some of these other people that are shown here are also named in the photograph, but they are showing symbols with them and things and declamations for this is like someone using a sextant here, and he's looking up at the stars and declamating as if he was on a ship. Only if he was on a ship right now, he'd be in India. And you can see that important philosophers of the old were saying once they had it all figured out, look, here it is. Regardless of that, this is not the first time that Ireland has been called and cited as Atlantis. In 2004, Dr. Ulf Erlingsson, a renowned prize-winning Swedish scientist, published the book Atlantis from a geographer's perspective and a scientific paper which both claimed that Ireland was the legendary lost island. Furthermore, he claimed that the physical description and measurements of Plato's Atlantis perfectly matched Ireland. And I showed this in an old ancient video, or actually talked about it, where there was a picture going on. But diagonal across about this angle here to Ireland and straight across, which would be a perfect X or cross, across it in stadia measurements measures the same size within a bit. But if you imagine, it would have been a little bit larger whenever this tale would have been originally told, it makes even more sense. Another thing that no one points out here, much like Orion is shown on the belt of the three pyramids and the Orion pose that's done on them and the symbology that goes along with it and all of that, is that sign, if you were to cut across, and there are churches in those places, but that looks exactly like the sign of the Southern Cross, which is a constellation in the heavens again. Just somewhat of a coincidence, but as above, so below, and you keep getting that everywhere. And was that symbology and that important because people knew of the island itself? Did that have anything to do with it? Something we may not ever know. But people tell you that a lot of the descriptions match closely, but there's exaggerations given and things like that. And when those exaggerations are given, it deviates from the possibility of truth. And so people try desperately to discount anything about it. And you go, well, if I told you a telephone story, you'd have one thing off in not even a couple of years, bud. And so it wouldn't take too many people and come back to me. We tried to do it in school, just in the classroom. It's funny, a scratch turns into a broken arm. But amazingly, if we took just a small bit of exaggeration out of the tale, many things are all of a sudden possible. He claims to expose to the scorn, ridicule. He claims exposed him to the scorn and ridicule of his peers, who informed him that writing seriously about Atlantis was tantamount to professional suicide for an academic, yet he went ahead anyway. When interviewed, he said sometimes a scientist has to do with what a scientist has to do. Oh, and I ruined that, botched it going through it, and I don't want to have to edit this. But there comes a time in a man's life where all that glitters is gold doesn't matter. And to quote from Conan the Barbarian, and sometimes all a rich old man wants is his daughter back. Or all a rich man wants is just the truth, and all of this doesn't seem to matter so much anymore. For after I'm gone, none of it matters anymore. And some of us are just seeking the truth. I'm retired now and I don't give a shit. So I'm starting to expose a lot of things that academics are taught not to do in any way, shape, or form. And trying to make connections. Oh, that's a slippery slope and a road. Well, it's a road less traveled for sure. Where there's a bunch of signs before you go down it that says haunted village and all these things. Woo! I said, oh, that sounds cool. Let's check that out. The Keystone team agree with Earlingson's finding. In addition, their research includes that additional pieces of evidence that simply weren't available to Earlingson when he wrote his book 16 years ago. And so this does keep evolving over time and people putting and making connections. And things change. I quite often use the fact that all these things that I talked about 25, 35 years ago have now been largely vindicated just on Gobekli Tepe and finding a few other sites and other information in little places around and other people making connections. It's a well-known historical fact that the Egyptian civilization predated the Greeks by thousands of years. It's also well known that Ireland's Stone Age constructs were built long before the Egyptian pyramids and temples. A virtually unknown yet well-evidenced theory is that the builders of Newgrange, Ireland's spectacular Stone Age temple, used boats to transport dozens of huge boulders to the site from Cloggerhead, which is over 30 kilometers away or 18 miles away. Some of these boulders weighed as much as 10 tons. Imagine the quality of boat and level of skill required to load and unload such huge weights, let alone transport them. Stone Age quays and boats found near Grange are estimated to be at least 5,000 years old, making them also older than the pyramids, and they're also good quality boats and not something like a reed type thing. But we also see that evidenced in the first people of the Mediterranean we look at, and they're Phoenicians again, these people associated with red hair, and the phoenix, and the idea that something devastating had happened, but yet they had grown from the ashes again. That's Newgrange, Boyne Valley, and I did a video recently on other sites found in the Boyne Valley just recently. So you'd think people have been all through here like crazy, and after they found the few, somebody flew over with a plane and this, that, and the other. No, it takes whenever they have a drought and this, that, and the other, and LiDAR and things, and all of a sudden, bam, they're like, they're all over the place. All over the place. But not just in Ireland too. And I've shown recently dolmens and how dolmens are connected all across the areas and in the same similar people. It goes back to a time before we're talking about. For I'm just clarifying it coming into reality. Newgrange is also perfectly aligned to the rising sun at winter solstice, as are hundreds of Irish megaliths, which demonstrate a stunning level of astronomical, mathematical, and construction knowledge attained by the early Irish. Indeed, even the people that wrote bad histories on them told you that they understood the circumference of the earth and the depth of the cosmos, the distance of the stars and planets, and all of this stuff. As they were kicking their ass and killing them off, they were trying to steal this information. Would have been a different place if everything would have come all together rather than one dominating the other and go, no, no, no. It goes like this. Hindsight's always 2020. We're in 2020 right now, and I'm trying to give people hindsight. Knock, knock. We know for sure that the Stone Age Irish were master astronomers. We know for sure that they were master builders. We know for sure that the Irish had boats. It's not much of a stretch to imagine that the wandering Irish sailing from their Atlantic island home to explore a wider world. Well, they're out there in the Atlantic, so let's make that Atlas-Atlantic connection. The Atlantic location. The most telling characteristic of Atlantis is that it was an island located in the Atlantic Ocean. Obviously, Ireland is an island in the Atlantic Ocean with an ancient people, language, and culture. There are an estimated 100,000 Stone Age constructions remaining in Ireland. including the most spectacular megaliths on the earth, as you would expect if they really were advanced early civilization. Similar constructions, mounds, cairns, that word cairn we'll get to, stone circles, dolmens, passage tombs, etc., are all found all over the world, proving that in the entire world, not just Ireland, has a stunning and forgotten ancient lost history. Knock, knock. Some claim that Atlantis lies at the bottom of the ocean, and there's a cool song about it. However, science has eliminated this as a possibility, and an island in the Atlantic that does not exist is much as more viable explanation than an island that doesn't. Just like the ancient Aryan language is a much more viable possibility as they see it stem back into one common language than it stems back to something that doesn't exist when people try to discount it. Some claim that Atlantis lies at the bottom of the ocean. However, science has eliminated this as a possibility, and an island in the Atlantic that does not exist is a more viable explanation. And I'll agree with that. There are many descriptions of Plato's Atlantis that perfectly fit Ireland, while there is also many that don't. It's clear that Plato's legend is useful but unreadable, that it combined two separate related places, and we're getting into those here in a minute on part 2. A lot of exaggeration and several historical errors, but Plato's Atlantis was an island in the Atlantic with a fertile circular plain which was surrounded by mountains that descended towards the sea. Ireland was the only island on Earth with these features in this location. And here's a beautiful picture, and it's where we're going to stop part 1 here and go to part 2. This is a hiking trail at the top of Diamond Hill in Connemara National Park in Ireland. And I'll tell you that after studying my family lineage, I have a connection to the people here. In fact, the name itself shows it. Kind of a beautiful looking, weird landscape. And why does it look so weird? Well, everything you look at, even the water, used to be land, and the ocean started out much further. Wonder what's all in these places, because all that's left is the higher ground and the higher places. All right, we're going on to part 2, and look in your top left-hand corner, and we'll click and go to that part and carry to the next. And then, of course, we've got 3 and 4 coming also. Like, share, and subscribe, and enjoy. Put a comment down, and we'll see you in part 2. Peace.